What follows is the speech Barack Obama should now give to the nation. This is the address Barack Obama should now give, rather than another one about how everybody else needs to do more and say more and stand for more in this time of crisis. This is the speech Barack Obama should give now, because he has been unexpectedly afforded the opportunity to perhaps actually start something that could end this nightmare of a madman steadily disassembling American democracy, a Timu Hitler gradually turning harassment of minorities into persecution and ethnic cleansing, a criminal who must stay in office at any cost or face the reality of dying in prison for any one of his hundreds and thousands of crimes. This is the speech Barack Obama should now give at this moment in the hopes that he can inspire America as he did in 2008, only this time not merely inspire it, but save it. My fellow Americans, if a random madman on the street or online had accused me of treason, I would probably never hear him say it. It has happened since I left the presidency. It happened during my presidency. It happened before my presidency. I would not blink. It is part of the job. If an active American politician made such an accusation against me, I would never respond. Republican and conservative politics have long since fallen into the gutter, through the stone beneath the gutter, through the basement. But when the current president of the United States accuses me or any other former American president of treason, and more disturbingly still claims to have incontrovertible proof of my guilt, and instead presents only some laughably cherry-picked documents that point only to his own guilt and his own collusion with Russia and his own insanity, as Mr. Trump did the day before yesterday in the Oval Office. When this kind of sacrilege occurs, I, as an American citizen, am left no other choice but to respond. I must respond not for myself, but for my country, for our future. Donald Trump can no longer remain president of the United States. Whatever there is in the so-called Epstein files that incriminates him in whatever crime or bestiality or abuse, it has severed the already flimsy tether between himself and reality. And a president, the most powerful man in the world, who is severed from reality yet retains the all-too-real powers of the office, is a danger to the life of every person in this country and every person on this planet. Nothing in my conduct has ever approached the words Mr. Trump has used to describe me. His animus towards me is decades old. It has been analyzed by many smarter people than I. It is clear that it contains elements of racism and of envy and of lust for power and, most importantly and most perilously, of sheer madness. As someone who loves my country above all else, as someone who has devoted my life to serving my country, his words are slanderous in the highest degree possible, using human language. There is no worse accusation he can make and no more amplifying platform he could have made it from. In addition, I must note that the members of the Supreme Court Mr. Trump himself appointed, including one who he was able to appoint only because of a manipulative and unethical political trick enacted by his party while he was running for president, have created virtual blanket immunity for presidents for acts committed while in office. Therefore, it is not possible for any president to be guilty of any of the crimes Mr. Trump has alleged about me, even if they were remotely true in the slightest possible degree, because Mr. Trump has made sure that there are no crimes any president can be guilty of. Therefore, Mr. Trump has exceeded all boundaries of acceptable comment or political criticism or legally defendable speech, even within the mentally warped world he inhabits, and therefore it is necessary that I act on two fronts. In the lesser of these, I have today had my attorneys file a slander and defamation suit against Donald John Trump as an individual. In this suit, I seek damages of $500 billion from him personally. I have filed an additional slander and defamation suit against the government of the United States of America for permitting him to use it as a staging ground for his slanders, smears, and more importantly, for giving him a place from which to try to usher in a form of America in which a madman's vague effort to save himself from prison by fabricating an imaginary plot against this country is acceptable. I will state now that any money I receive after I prevail in these two lawsuits, any part of the $1 trillion in damages I am seeking, will be distributed to citizens, immigrants, and defendants who, like me, have been slandered and abused and whose life has been imperiled by this creature Trump. But more importantly than these defamation suits, I am calling for the leaders of the Democratic Party to meet with me and with the governors of the key Democratic-led states, and with former President Clinton, and with the members of the Supreme Court that President Clinton and I appointed, and with the key business leaders of this country at a conference to attempt to fend off the coming disaster Donald Trump seeks to inflict on this nation and this world, to stop it with actions that would shame a Soviet leader or a medieval king. We who believe in democracy, we who believe in an America safe for us to disagree with one another without having someone in power who can respond by jailing us or threatening us with phony charges and a politically corrupted judiciary, we who believe in America must gather our forces now to fend off disaster later. To begin, we will be filling out the idea voiced by Governor Newsom of California that his state should no longer pay the expenses of the so-called red states whose economies are such that they cannot provide services for their own people without being underwritten by the so-called blue states. Governor Newsom has suggested, in effect, a federal tax boycott. And at our conference, those of us who want to save America will propose an organized and safe process for all the states to participate in this tax boycott and assume all the risks so that you as a citizen will bear no risk. We will additionally analyze, organize, and propose a national strike to hasten the realization by the members of this president's cabinet and party and his congressional leaders and his Supreme Court that they must join our movement or they must assume responsibility for the financial chaos that will ensue in the red states and the areas which they purport to represent. America will not last long as a dictatorship run by a minority of unproductive racists if the fair-minded people of the nation who oppose such a dictatorship decide to stop paying for it. Our conference will propose legal, peaceful means to remove Donald John Trump from office immediately, along with many of his most fervent and least mentally well acolytes and enforcers, and to replace his administration with a bipartisan, multi-party one that can serve to undo the damage he has already inflicted on us as a form of caretaker government until the midterm elections of 2026 and the presidential election of 2028, hopefully put us back on the path to the tolerant, diverse, multi-party nation in which we all grew up and in which you and I and our parents and our ancestors have thrived since 1776. Our conference will seek to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th of next year, the 250th anniversary of our nation, by ensuring that on that anniversary, our nation will still be here. I invite all responsible Republican leaders to join us, to, as President Lincoln said, disenthrall yourselves. Disenthrall yourselves because you already know without me telling you that the next person Mr. Trump will accuse of treason is you. The dogmas of the quiet past, President Lincoln said, are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I'm not holding my breath, by the way. Obama has become, if anything, the national scold. You really need to do more. I really need to be retired. His reaction to what Trump said, you or me, probably in those situations, we would have controlled ourselves and simply gone up and smacked Trump in the head. Obama's reaction was a too cool for school statement attributed to a spokesman. Beginning, out of respect for the office of the presidency, our office does not normally dignify the constant nonsense and misinformation flowing out of this White House with a response, but these claims, it is not nonsense, President Obama. It is a serious attempt to put you in prison, to put me in prison, to put all who oppose Trump in prison. It is not misinformation. It is brainwashing. And out of respect for the office of the presidency, the man in the office shits on the office of the presidency and thus every president who preceded him every hour of every day. The idea of the respect for the office of the President of the United States is dead. Someone must restore it. The people with the greatest opportunity to restore it and with the greatest need to restore it are our former presidents. That's you and Mr. Clinton. Mr. Bush is somewhere on the sidelines, even further away from the light than you are. In the attempt to not take any of this seriously, Obama takes it much too seriously. Nothing could go further right at this minute towards ousting Trump than Obama throwing punches here. Nothing would beat the staid, what an utter nonsensical boor response, to be replaced for once by the kind of rage the rest of us feel, President Obama. Somebody of stature, and it would be nice, somebody of probity, somebody who does tend to stand off, getting angry, summoning our fury, directing what lurks just beneath the surface of all of us. What we need right now is an I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore eruption from Barack Obama. But if it could be more sad that he's not saying something like my little speech, anything like that, anything hopefully better written, more inspirational, if it could be more sad, it is because he is uniquely qualified in a unique moment to get this off the dime. A president not just accusing his predecessors of treason and being sedacious. He said sedacious. Apparently that is Trump's version of seditious, or maybe sebaceous. Not just doing that, but claiming it's been proven. This is a unique opportunity to respond. It is an invitation to come over and smack him in the head and to invoke all the gravitas and gravity that the accused ex-president necessarily summons. The current Democratic leadership is terrified and dim and buried under consultants and focus groups. commentators were just commentators. A former president could actually put such a conference together and at minimal risk to himself and thus those who participated with him. I mean, how would Trump respond to such a conference? By accusing Obama of double secret treason? I also think the $500 billion lawsuit against Trump would be a nice touch. He would understand what that meant. Even he would understand what that meant. If you don't like any of that, President Obama, do something of your own choice. Do something you think is better than that, but do something, anything, because just an effing statement, not even under your own name, is utterly insufficient and makes it worse. You have a chance right now to kneecap this man. We do not. His White House is reported by a prominent news organization to be paralyzed by Trumpstein. He's down. Kick him. Kneecap him. Right now, the distance you are keeping from our crisis, our national existential crisis, is assuming Marie Antoinette-like proportions. And I know Marie Antoinette never said the cake thing. I am saying you, like every other political professional, seems to remain under the delusion that the American Republic is elastic and everything will just snap back to normal proportions eventually. Yeah, just like it did in 2009. Remember when all the racists went away after your election? Just like it did in 2015 when Republicans stood firmly against nominating a man they all called a psychopath and some correctly called a Hitler. Just like it did in 2021 when, having failed at a coup from inside the White House and failed to keep their monster-in-chief in office, all those MAGA guys dispersed. We are broken, President Obama. Insane, impossible, inconceivable. I sure hope so, but regardless, Trump just not only said you're guilty of treason, but that it's been proved already that you're guilty of treason. You have to cut this guy's balls off, metaphorically, because he obviously doesn't have any actual ones anymore. As we know, it's always Taco Tuesday somewhere. And this isn't random. Like it or not, you are the last person to get him to have publicly backed down. When he backed down, he did the bare minimum back down. He never repeated the back down. He has always undermined his own back down, but he did publicly state, you were born in this country. Your birth certificate is legitimate. The ground zero of his goddamned America-destroying campaign was false. He admitted he was wrong. That was the one crack in the armor of bullshit he wears every day. You did that. Now, do it again. If the lawsuit seems beneath you and you don't want to have to stoop to save the nation, then go with the conference idea. Or go with another idea. Somebody have some ideas. You don't like my ideas? Do better. But do something. The point is that one way or the other, even if it's just old age, someday Trump will be gone. What is needed now is a strategy for making sure that he takes his followers and his evil with him to hell. What could be better than an all-party conference? A bipartisan effort to save the nation, a recognition that a minority is not only in command with dreams of enacting the world of George Orwell, but of using its victims' money to finance it. It's been a long time, but this nation has had bipartisan emergency conferences in which the peril presented by one man or one event has been obvious to all political parties, and they suspended all the rules just to fix it. One such conference resulted in a fatal bargain in 1877 that we should not repeat. The North got the White House, the South got the end of Reconstruction and the groundwork for Jim Crow. It was terrible. On the other hand, it forestalled, and so far it has forestalled it for 148 goddamn years, the only other option in January 1877, which was a second American Civil War with more carnage, more guns. I get it, President Obama, 8 long years. I couldn't make it to 6 years doing Sports Center every night. You've been off since January 20th, 2017. Even I don't take that much time off. My high school was the place that gave you your first true platform for a political speech. In 1991, you went there at the invitation of the same Hackley history teacher and department chairman who told me on graduation day in 1975 that the sportscasting thing I was planning was nice, but that I needed to realize that someday, whether I liked it or not, I would end up, whether as candidate or as reporter or as commentator, I would end up in politics. And I thanked him and smiled politely and shook his hand and told him he was crazy. And he wasn't crazy. President Obama, that is a unique, if trivial, bond between you and I invoke Walter Schneller's clairvoyance for you and for me, and say to you what he would say. This madman Trump has afforded you a gift, an opportunity to do more for your country than even 8 years in the White House gave you. Walter was a courtly man, the youngest son of diplomats from Vienna. But he would have told you this even more bluntly than I am now. In 2007, he complained to me that he didn't like my language towards Bush in the MSNBC special comments. And as I began to apologize to him for telling the President of the United States to shut up, he interrupted me and said, No, you missed my point. I do not understand how you refrain yourself from calling that mother effer Bush a mother effer. I would. So on Mr. Schneller's behalf, President Obama, this is your moment. Kneecap that mother effer. Follow up on something I just dropped in there. Trump is clearly furious, unquote. A Politico close to the White House source told Politico's Trump stenographer yesterday, quote, "It's the first time I've seen them sort of paralyzed." Yes, please. Trump's White House is sort of paralyzed? Excellent. Kick them down the stairs. They can't fight back. It'll hurt more. If they're paralyzed, kick them down the stairs, then take the elevator and meet them when they land and kick them again. The Trumpstein birthday card is real. The one the Wall Street Journal reported. And it cannot be the worst thing about Trump in the Trumpstein files. Otherwise, he would have released the files because it's not that bad. It's stupid and sleazy, and that's Trump's baseline. The photos of Epstein at Trump's second wedding, they're real. And they can't be the worst thing in the files. Otherwise, he would have released the files. Whatever is worst in the Trumpstein files is at least B+ material. Keep hammering. They're sort of paralyzed. Let's go for 100% on that. I mean, good God, even Mike Johnson has the presence of mind to act when the opportunity has been afforded him. Trump needed as many distractions as he could from Trumpstein, and none of them have worked. Even the Tulsi Gabbard drooling witch treason nonsense and her conflation of Russian trivia with actual Russian sabotage for Trump, and the talk of arrests and trials and the release of the Martin Luther King Jr. files and the Hillary email story by Pam Bondi, better known as Pam Bondi, who refused to prosecute Epstein in Florida, and the destruction of Christie dog killer gnome when she threatened New York City and reporters. None of those Trumpstein distractions have been enough. Even Mike Johnson knew he needed to act, President Obama, so he sent the House home to avoid any votes in the month ahead on the Democratic amendments to force the release of the Trumpstein files because they need this window for Trump's legal mouthpiece, Todd Blanche, to go see Ghislaine Maxwell in prison and presumably offer her a pardon if she will lie and say Trump had nothing to do with it. Because as flawed a plan as that is, and as many new conspiracy theories that would be spun instantly out of that obvious perjury from Maxwell, it's doing something. Those defending this nation are doing less than that. And I'd like to point out that one organization that prides itself on defending this nation, on day 4 of all this, and we are now numbered at day 17 of Trumpstein, on day 4 of all this, the broken New York Times posted this headline: How Trump deflected MAGA's wrath over Epstein, at least for now. By tapping into other grievances, President Trump managed to turn one of the most fractious moments for his base into a unifying one. Spoiler alert, Times. No, he didn't. Some poll numbers from the impeccable G. Elliott Morris, the last king of 538. Democrats now lead the House generic ballot, 47-43, 8-point edge, 9% undecided. Trump is at 57% disapproval. His issue disapprovals are worse. He's underwater everywhere except under border security. He's ahead on 6 points on border security. Everything else, disapproval, is far ahead of approval. Prices and inflation, it's 61% disapproval to 33% approval. CNN's frantic guy Enton is now doing a disapproval poll of polls, and his numbers are even worse than Elliott Morris's. Trump underwater in an aggregate poll on immigration, -5, on the economy, -14, on foreign policy, -14, on trade, -15, on Epstein, -37. Trump is at -37 on Epstein. And even the Politico dweebs say he and the White House are paralyzed. It's time, President Obama, every Democratic leader, every responsible Republican, it's time. It is time. It is today. The door is open. Push Trump down the goddamned flight of stairs. I don't think you need it, President Obama, but you're certainly willing to have the copyright on anything that you liked in my version of the speech you should now give. And you should sue him because that's the only thing he understands and the only thing his base understands. And a big, impossible number like $500 billion, as stupid as it is to anybody with an IQ larger than 25, Trump supporters do not have IQs larger than 25. They will be scared at the thought that Trump might owe you $500 billion and that they might owe you another $500 billion. And if you don't like any of those ideas, as I said, any that you propose will necessarily be better than any that I have just spoken. Do something. This is the country and the history of this nation calling on you and you alone. A postcard will not suffice. Or a playlist. Or a very, very early college basketball bracket. Also of interest here, who is the last political person in America who should write that nobody wants to hear the political opinions or analysis of anybody else? Who is the worst person to conclude this? Who is the worst spokesman for, this guy over there should shut up. Nobody cares what he thinks. Now, this is close. It could be Chuck Todd. Could be Joe Scarborough. It could be Joe, the woman version Scarborough. But it's not. It's a guy with the initials CC. And he's in worst persons. CC, and I don't mean Sabathia. And CC has perpetrated one of the all-time lack of self-awareness doozies. Even for him. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this edition of Countdown. So you will love this, and I suspect you will love this, whether you agree with me on the Stephen Colbert firing or you disagree with me on the Stephen Colbert firing, or if you only accept some parts of my argument that no, they were going to end his show anyway when his contract ends next spring, and the fact that they are now leaving him on CBS every night to say whatever the F he wants between now and then for 10 months anyway, kind of confirms they didn't do this to shut him up, or just to shut him up because they're not shutting him up. Anyway, this is the part you will love. This is the definition of political commentary and political protest. The liberals have it in a smaller scale than the conservatives, for whom everything is a conservative protest. They are as soft as church music, to borrow the phrase of an old colleague of mine. Anyway, this is the part you will love. I have been invited by a prominent liberal activist movement to saunter the 10 blocks or so from my home over to Colbert's studio to speak at a rally protesting his firing. I said I'd be happy to. I will speak about CBS's capitulation to and their appeasement of Trump and how they've turned that into the whorehouse network over there. How they are behaving the way Timu Hitler wants them to, but I will have to emphasize that the Colbert firing wasn't really part of this, except in a small symbolic way that's maybe a little bit more cynical than you realize, that they are using this, that they were going to do anyway, as a sop to Trump. But that it's not really about Trump, just as the downsizing of Seth Meyers' show was not about Trump, and the cancellation or the other neutering of the Kimmel and Fallon shows to come will not be about Trump either. Shockingly, with those caveats, they passed. Anyway, still ahead, I have argued this seemingly very pro-corporate, anti-liberal protest before, and taken hell for it then too, but I was right then and I'm right now. And with the anniversary, the first anniversary of his passing coming up, it is time to revisit the day MSNBC fired its top-rated host and its top-rated show came to an end, The Phil Donahue Show, just as George Bush started bombing Iraq. And MSNBC claimed it was losing money too, and MSNBC was also right. They were going to do it anyway. They just exploited it. Next, in things I promised not to tell. Actually, I can go longer about that. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. And this is the problem when you skip the worst persons segment from one show. They begin to pile up so much that there are honorary mentions. The cup overfloweth. Honorary mention number 1, Andrew Yang. There are times at which it looks like, sounds like, and reads as if Elon Musk is the stupidest rich person in the world. Or maybe that guy, Bill, the investment money guy, the hedge fund guy. No, Andrew Yang is the dumbest rich guy in the world. After the sad news on Tuesday Andrew Yang wrote, R.I.P. Ozzy Osbourne, a true American original. He deleted it when somebody pointed out to him. As Homer Simpson always said, I've always said I prefer our Beatles to England's Rolling Stones. And I already mentioned number 2. Well, it's Trump. Jamel Hill, my old brief colleague at ESPN, pointed this one out. Yes, there's always a treat, she wrote. A tweet, but a treat. President, he wrote, should not be telling the Washington Redskins to change their name. Our country has far bigger problems. Focus on them, not nonsense, said the man who just tried to distract you from Trumpstein by demanding that the Washington Commanders, Commandeers, Washington Football Club, Washington Trumpsteins, whatever they're called now, he just demanded they change their name to the Redskins. He has previously written that a president should not be telling the Washington football team to change its name because there are bigger problems. That was when he was still partially sane. I already mentioned number 3, House Republicans. John Bresnahan reports they are trying to rename part of the Kennedy Center for Melania Trump. No, not the dumpster in the back. A GOP amendment on the interior spending bill, which has now been added to that bill, that the Opera House located in the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts shall be known and designated as the First Lady Melania Trump Opera House. So you want to name it after Melania? Have you thought about just naming it then the Anastasia.com Memorial Opera House? Or the Trumpstein, Jeffrey Epstein helped introduce Melania and Trump Opera House? Or the This is where people do not make themselves intelligible in any known language Opera House? To the winners, the bronze worst. Boy, is Mike Lee stupid. Someone has postulated that the senator from Utah went into the Warren holes, the rabbit holes and the Warren dens and the rabbit warrens and the Warren Commission that is the internet and lost his mind there. He posted this, Powell's out, and before it and after it had a fire alarm. Oh, it was important. Powell's out, and posted this note addressed to the President, the White House, Washington, D.C. I'm worried about this already. Dear Mr. President, period. Okay, so far I see 4 mistakes. You'd address it to President Donald Trump, the White House, Washington, D.C., usually with a zip code. And it would be on some kind of stationery with his name on it. From Jerome Powell. After much reflection, I've decided to resign from my position as chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, effective at the close of business today. And the real problem with this is down at the bottom where it says respectfully, and everything has been crowded to fit one page on a computer. Respectfully, Jerome H. Powell, Chairman, Federal Reserve Board. There is a logo of some sort, and it has an eagle and some stripes, and there's a wreath there, looks like an olive branch on each side, and then this inscription, Oedo of Goveryabeb. So it's the Oedo of Goveryabeb. Then at the bottom, it's a Ribble Reserve. Reserve is right. Say, A. The last word, instead of system, it's a S-I. It's like doing an eye chart. Backwards E, another L upside down. What looks like a kind of Sloman's shield, for those of you who know what Sloman's is. And then an A, only the bar in the A is at the bottom rather than in the middle. So because it has this official-looking seal, Mike Lee, who among other things believes people believe in his comb-over, Mike Lee thought this was official. The Oedo of Goveryabeb. There's only one word right in the logo, reserve. Everything else is designed to fool stupid people, like Senator Mike Lee. Someone has to take Mike's phone away from him. They need to take his seat away from him, obviously, but the first step, take his effing phone away from him. He does something like this once a week. Even for the Republican Party, he's stupid. The runner-up, I'm going to give this to the Daily Beast, but I'm not confident that it's their doing. They may be trolling us, but certainly to the other person mentioned in this, it's one of the great understated tweets of all time. The Daily Beast. It's a promo, a link to one of their pieces. The Daily Beast. Opinion. I simply cannot figure out why Hunter Biden thinks that the Democratic Party or the world is in need of his opinions about politics, writes Chris Cillizza. Then the link is Hunter Biden really needs to shut it. Why is he talking? Why is he still talking? By Chris Cillizza. I think somebody at the Daily Beast did this deliberately. It's a troll, isn't it? I mean, they can't be that stupid, can they? Cillizza? Oh my, yes, he is that stupid. He is stupid enough to have written this article asking why somebody else keeps writing when clearly nobody wants their opinion, or his opinion, but not the Daily Beast. And then again, they did pay Chris Cillizza probably $20, $25 for this piece. Why People Should Not Be Listening to This Guy by Chris Cillizza. Forward by Chuck Todd. But our winner, speaking of which, Alex Jones. Remembering that the late Ozzy Osbourne had been acutely sick since 2019 and not particularly well before then, Parkinson's disease was diagnosed in 2019, along with blood clots, mobility issues, depression, a whole array of new drugs that had their own side effects, and he fought through it gamely and bravely, literally appearing on stage just days before his death. Considering that 2019 was the diagnosis, before COVID vaccines, before COVID, Alex Jones, this brain-dead, endless blight on mankind, this waste of carbon, this large pile of recycling just waiting for the right landfill space to open up, Alex Jones writes after Ozzy Osbourne's death, quote, "The iconic Ozzy Osbourne has died suddenly after years of illness, which mysteriously started after getting vaccinated." So, Alex, I have one question. If that's true, can I treat you to a free COVID vaccination? Alex, nothing will stop him from hurting people. Jones, today's other worst person in the world. And so to our number one story and Phil Donahue. This is not about what a good guy Phil Donahue was, and he was. This is not about what a committed liberal he was, and he was. And this is not about how he changed television talk shows. Television, indeed, for good or for ill. All of which is true and unquestionable. This is about the contention that has echoed for more than 2 decades that Phil Donahue was fired by his last employer and had his career ended by his last employer, MSNBC, because he opposed the Iraq War. That's not why he was fired. That might have been why he was fired as soon as he was, but that was not why he was fired. And the reason I know this is I was there. And as I saw this play out in real time, initially I was a disinterested bystander. The firing played out and people told me things in real time that they thought it was safe for me to know, because what the hell? I was only going to be back at MSNBC in 2003 for a couple weeks, maybe just a couple of days. I'd been hired by NBC Sports to do the Olympics and other stuff for them. It's not like I was going to replace Phil Donahue at 8 o'clock on MSNBC when they eventually fired him. Well, actually, I did replace Phil Donahue at 8 p.m. on MSNBC when they actually fired him. But that was not the plan. That was never the plan. And then all of a sudden one night, that was the plan. Phil Donahue had retired in 1996 because his ratings had dropped from first, because he was the originator of that format, the daytime drama live talk show. Barbara Walters did one, Dr. Phil did one. They've all done them. This was the original, the Donahue Show. A high feminist content, a high liberal content. And given the fact that he often did really stupid topics, a high intellectual topic and content. But by 1996, he was done. And he retired. And in 2002, MSNBC approached him about doing a primetime show on MSNBC. And again, when they did fire him, the show that replaced him at 8 o'clock on MSNBC was called, checks notes, Countdown with Keith Olbermann. And see, that's your first clue that Donahue was not fired because he opposed Iraq and Bush. Countdown originally started as essentially just another hour of the latest news from Iraq after we invaded. And gradually, I'd say within 2 months, I began to take a somewhat skeptical view of this. But before I went on the air, before they assigned me the 8 o'clock show and replacing Phil Donahue, I had spent about a year doing a daily commentary on the ABC radio network that was carried by a couple of hundred stations, including one in New York, in which I questioned the sanity of this impending war, and we all knew it was coming for a year. We all knew it was the only thing the Bush administration had been prepared for as of September 11th, was a war in Iraq. And the only conspiracy I ever put any weight in was the idea that they looked at 9/11 and went, oh, crap, what are we going to do now? Oh, my God, it's an excuse to go into Iraq. That was the conspiracy of 9/11. That's the inside job, and that's the extent of it. They were prepared to go into Iraq at whatever excuse presented itself. If the weather had been bad 6 weeks in a row, they would have said, that's Saddam Hussein's fault, we're going in. In any event, my point is that if you're going to get rid of a guy for opposing Iraq and George W. Bush, you are not going to replace the Phil Donahue show with Countdown with Keith Olbermann. You are firing Donahue and replacing him with Olbermann. Bad call, buddy. And again, I don't defend MSNBC, and I am defending MSNBC because I saw this play out in real time. Countdown started as another hour of news from Iraq, and by June, I was telling the real story about the rescue of Private Jessica Lynch, who had been taken hostage by the Iraqis when, in fact, she was in a hospital, and they were torturing her there. No, in fact, the doctors, it turned out, from the Iraqi hospital had contacted U.S. servicemen through intermediaries and said, we don't have enough equipment to take care of her. We're worried about permanent spinal damage. Why don't you come over and get her when we'll stand outside and you can go in and get her? And they turned it into the raid at Entebbe. And I was the first newscaster nationally to go and say, you know, there's this report from a Toronto newspaper that that's not the way it went down. And Bob Wright, the head of NBC, called up the head of MSNBC Primetime, my boss, Phil Griffin, and said, fire him. And Griffin talked him down to make him apologize. And I said, apologize to who, Phil? And he said, apologize to the troops. I said, I didn't even mention the troops. I guess that's why. You're making the troops look like they didn't know that this was... I said, so you want me to tell the story again and explain that I wasn't trying to insult the troops? Yes, that'll settle it. Otherwise, we'll have to cancel the show. And I said to myself, oh, it's a little demeaning. On the other hand, I get to tell the story again. I get to throw a little cold water on this idea that this was some sort of rescue. So I told the story again. In fact, I said, would you like me to apologize again next week? And they said yes. And soon we were doing all the stories that questioned whether or not George W. Bush was lying to America, which he was. That's what they got instead of Phil Donahue. They did not fire Phil Donahue over Iraq to get me. Not just to get me, but to get 8 goddamn years of me saying this, screaming at George Bush, getting on the cover of the New Yorker, shut the hell up, Mr. President. They fired Phil Donahue in 2003 for the following reasons. Number one, they made, NBC management and MSNBC in particular, they made the classic day part mistake. I have talked about day parts before. If you remember Katie Couric being lured away from the Today Show on NBC to host the CBS Evening News and being an utter disaster, that was a day part mistake. The day part is The mornings, the afternoons, the middays, the evenings, the late nights, the overnights. It's a radio term, but it applies to television. And the simple truth about day parts is just because you are popular in one day part does not mean you will automatically be popular in another. In fact, it may mean you will be unpopular. I learned this at the age of 32. No, earlier than that. I learned this at the age of 29. I went from KTLA in Los Angeles, where my sportscast was on, at 10 minutes to 11 o'clock every night. And it was the intellectual thing to watch on TV. I went from KTLA down the street to KCBS, from Channel 5 to Channel 2, where the sportscast came on not at 10:50 every night, but at 11:30 every night. It was the same sportscast. I was the same guy. The lighting was a little bit better. The material was a little bit better. And everybody hated me because that was a different day part. Everybody who liked the thing and thought it was intellectual, they were going to bed at 11 o'clock. They were literally not going to stay up till 11:30. All the people who were watching me at 11:30 were the people who did not have to be at their jobs early the next morning. People who were fungible, let's put it that way in terms of their career. That's how I learned about day parts. Katie Couric went from the Today Show, where she was a co-host, and when you got tired of her, and then came that guy who later wound up to be and then she'd come back on when you were tired of him, and they took her, and she mostly did interviews and little fluff pieces, and she was a happy gal, and they put her on the CBS Evening News, where her job was to read the teleprompter at 6:30 at night. And nobody knew her at 6:30 at night because she'd been on at 7:30 in the morning. And everybody hated her because she wasn't that good at reading the teleprompter. And she couldn't do those little fluffy interviews. It was a news reading job, and it was a disaster. And it happens again and again. And several somebodies, including the people who spent millions of dollars on the MSNBC Phil Donahue show, thought that because Phil Donahue had been a brilliant success between the years 1967 and 1996 on over-the-air television, usually running at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that he would be a success at 8 o'clock at night on cable in 2002. Day part plus the other great mistake, which is a success on broadcast television, was automatically a success on cable television, or vice versa. That was the primary reason. They had violated the first rule. The show was doomed from the day they signed into the contract. They also had another problem. To get him to come out of retirement, even though he wanted to, he's from television, he wants to keep doing it. I'm from television, I want to keep doing it. It's part of our psychological problems. Even though he wanted to do it, he knew he had them over a barrel. It was MSNBC. It was a minefield. There were littered corpses everywhere of shows that had not succeeded. The 8 p.m. thing alone was a disaster area. Between my two stints there, I was gone for 4 years and 4 months, and there were 17 different shows on at 8 o'clock. You had to get what you wanted while you could get it. And Phil Donahue said, I want a huge staff, and I'm not going to Secaucus, freaking New Jersey to do my show. I'm going to do it from 30 Rock, or I'm not going to do it at all. And it's going to have a live audience. And I want a staff of 3 times the size of anybody else's. I want 3 executive producers. And I went, okay, Mr. Donahue. Okay, Mr. Donahue. Okay, Mr. Donahue. The show now cost about 10 times as much to produce as any other hour on cable news, meaning that it didn't just have to do as well as the other shows on MSNBC, or even slightly better to lift up the boat, but just to pay for itself, it basically had to do 10 times better ratings than any other show on cable television. Guess what? It didn't. The Donahue Show on MSNBC premiered in August of 2002. The rating was 0.1. The network was averaging, in its depths, 0.2. The Phil Donahue Show, after initial success, the highest rating they'd ever gotten for a premiere show, even mine, sank to about half of the average audience on MSNBC. Was it because he talked a lot about Iraq and doubted the reasonableness of going to war there? Maybe. Maybe it was the fact that he was on at 8 o'clock at night and everybody who used to watch him was either dead or looking for him at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Back to the day part subject. So how come when the story of Phil Donahue's firing by MSNBC as the Iraq War started always points out that Donahue's show and Donahue were fired and canceled while it had the highest ratings on MSNBC? Well, they left out one detail in that, which was they had the highest ratings on MSNBC at the time that the show was canceled. For the month of February 2003, it averaged 446,000 viewers. Just to give you a relative idea, at the sort of apex of countdown on MSNBC 2009, we did an average of 1,200,000 viewers a night. 446,000 was the best at MSNBC in 2003. As this war approached, it was terrible. It was a low number. It wasn't that much bigger than anybody else's, and it sure wasn't 10 times bigger than every other cable show in the business. It had the highest ratings that month, and they canceled it anyway because it was hemorrhaging money. And my friend of the time, Phil Griffin, who had filled me in on the entirety of this story as it unfolded, said that they were only getting those high ratings because they were spending now, on top of everything else, a fortune in advertising. They bought every local commercial they could get. They put bus ads in most of the major cities trying to get people to watch Donahue. It was a desperate attempt to keep Phil Donahue on the air. As he put it, an unfortunate term, and Phil was known for them at the time of February and March of 2003, we had to carpet bomb with advertising. I was like, Phil, what about Iraq? Oh, you're right, buddy. The reason we are left with the impression that MSNBC canceled the late Phil Donahue show because he was opposed to Iraq was Phil Donahue wanted it that way. I understand this fully. Well, I think what happened to me, the biggest lesson, I think, is how corporate media shapes our opinions and our coverage, Donahue said. This was a decision, my decision, meaning relating to the cancellation of his show, the decision to release me came from far above. This was not an assistant program director who decided to separate me from MSNBC. They were terrified of the anti-war voice. Let me interrupt to say these things are true. They were terrified of the anti-war voice. My own experience over the Jessica Lynch story would explain that. On the other hand, of course it wasn't the assistant program director who separated him from MSNBC. It was the president of MSNBC, the president of NBC News, and the president of NBC, because that's the decisions they reserve for themselves, because those are the egotistical ones, the ones where you can call in some TV star and say, either you do it my way or you're fired. To resume Mr. Donahue's comments. They were terrified of the anti-war voice, and that is not an overstatement. Anti-war voices were not popular, and if you're General Electric, you certainly don't want an anti-war voice on a cable channel that you own. Donald Rumsfeld is your biggest customer. So, by the way, I had to have two conservatives on for every liberal. I could have Richard Pearl on alone. Richard Pearl was a diplomat, in quotes, who worked for Bush, but I couldn't have Dennis Kucinich on alone, former mayor of Cleveland who was most anti-war. I was considered two liberals. It really is funny almost when you look back on how the management was just frozen by the anti-war voice. We were scolds, we weren't patriotic, American people disagreed with us, and we weren't good for business. All of which is true, but all of which somewhat exaggerates the point here. If 500,000 people, and it wasn't that many, were watching Phil Donahue every night, 500,000 people in a country that even then was pushing 300 million, isn't very much. His anti-war voice was an annoyance to these people, an embarrassment to people like Bob Wright, who ran NBC. Phil Donahue treated it as if he was, I don't know. He was the guy, Émile Zola, writing J'accuse against the French government in 1890-something. Phil also forgot in making this statement that in the fall of 2002, he was on the air on MSNBC alongside the late Jerry Nachman, who also had a show that wasn't doing well, talking about their terrible ratings. They're going to fire us, Nachman said to Donahue. And Donahue said, yeah, they are. That was in the fall of 2002, weeks after the Donahue show had premiered. There was talk of moving Donahue to the middle of the day. There was talk of moving Donahue somewhere else. There was talk of putting him on a hiatus. Instead, everybody got fired, except poor Nachman, who got sick. The reason I was at MSNBC was Jerry Nachman was sick. They didn't have enough anchors. They asked me to fill in for a few days. And the next thing you knew, I was doing the show. Again, would they have fired Phil Donahue if Bush had said, we have fixed this, there will be no war in Iraq? Yes, they would have fired him. It was hemorrhaging money. It was putting out $10 for every dollar it took in. Would they have fired him that fast? No way. They were short of staff. They were so short of staff, they brought me back, and I had left 5 years before in flames. That's why I was there. I'm wrapping this up. New York Magazine in 2010, I believe, wrote a long story about the then climaxing cable wars, particularly between CNN and MSNBC. Gabe Sherman, I think, wrote this. With the surge in patriotism following the terrorist attacks of 9/11, NBC CEO Bob Wright told Shapiro, that would be Neil Shapiro, then the head of NBC News, that MSNBC should try and outflank Fox on the right. We have to be more conservative than they are, Wright told Shapiro pointedly. That's absolutely true, by the way. Bob Wright actually thought you could be to the further right than Fox was at that time. And for years, I thought he was an idiot who just had these psychodrama ideas going on in his head. Well, of course, then came Trump. He was right. He just didn't know how to do it. Swirling graphics of the American flag, New York Magazine wrote, soon became a fixture on the network along with the tagline, America's News Channel. It said in graphics that were taped to all the cameras so that all the anchors would see it and say it, America's News Channel. Despite the network's emphasis on flag waving, MSNBC showed how little it understood the Fox model when, with Phil Griffin as MSNBC's primetime head, it hired the liberal Phil Donahue, who'd been Griffin's childhood idol, out of retirement in April 2002 to anchor an 8 p.m. primetime talk show that would challenge Bill O'Reilly. The show debuted with the highest ratings ever for an MSNBC program, attracting more than 1 million viewers in its first night, but within a month the audience was cut in half. Standard for MSNBC. Rita Cosby once got nearly 1 million viewers her first night. By the end of the week, she was down to 175,000. To resume. At the same time, executives expressed increasing unease about Donahue's vocal opposition to the looming war in Iraq. At a time when red meat patriotism prevailed, Donahue booked anti-war guests like Michael Moore, Rosie O'Donnell, Susan Sarandon, and Tim Robbins. By the way, I should point out that years later, when I was trying to explain to Phil Griffin that Rachel Maddow was the next star of MSNBC and she should be given her own show, he tried to hire Rosie O'Donnell instead. Soon, the Donahue problem threatened Griffin's job. In a tense phone conversation, NBC News President Shapiro told MSNBC President Eric Sorensen to fire Griffin, but Sorensen pushed back. I'm not going to do that, he told Shapiro. Number one, Phil's been loyal to me for a long time. I don't think it's right. Number two, we're shorthanded. We have all this talent, and he's the one who's managing it. Part two was a lie. They didn't have any talent at all. That's why I was back there. As a compromise, Griffin's job was spared, but he was stripped of responsibility for the show. The new producer insisted on a precise numerical balance between liberals and conservatives. Donahue's problems only increased when Chris Matthews let it be known that he wanted Donahue off the air. Matthews was a rising force at the network with a reported salary of $5 million a year. He cultivated former GE CEO Jack Welch and had the ear of the NBC CEO Bob Wright. The two summered together on Nantucket. And you know the limerick about Nantucket. Matthews saw himself as MSNBC's biggest star. Well, he was MSNBC's biggest something. And he was upset that the network was pumping significant resources into Donahue's show. Again, I would never defend Chris Matthews under any circumstances, but he's absolutely right about this. Matthews was delivering ratings with almost no advertising, ratings that were usually much higher than those of Phil Donahue, and here thousands and thousands of dollars in advertising were spent daily to try to sell people on a Phil Donahue show that nobody wanted, whether it offered a solution for world peace and eternal life. In the fall of 2002, U.S. News and World Report ran a gossip item that had Matthews saying over lunch in Washington that if Donahue stays on the air, he could bring down the network. After the item was published, Matthews showed up at Donahue's office and apologized. He didn't deny it, Donahue remembers. Matthews made a hobby within MSNBC of trying to get the rest of us fired. He tried to do that to me in 2008 during the coverage of the Republican National Convention when we got removed because of something I said. Matthews had been saying equally stupid things and usually factually inaccurate ones, but he did call Jeff Zucker and then Jeff Immelt, the head of GE, and say, you should fire Olbermann and keep me. back to the New York Magazine article. With the war looming, Sorensen and Griffin decided to take him off the air to make room for 24/7 war coverage. Matthews told me he had nothing to do with the decision. That's true. They never listened to him. For Griffin, the firing of his childhood idol was a painful experience. The guy that got me into TV probably hates my guts, and I wish he didn't because I love the guy, Griffin says. Griffin, who prevented Rachel Maddow from appearing on MSNBC for several years as an anchor anyway, he was paid back by the fact that somehow Rachel has forgotten this and made him the president of her production company. In any event, so all that was playing out, and I was just hanging around for a couple of days filling in for Jerry Nachman, who was just out sick, and then the diagnosis came back about how sick Jerry Nachman was, and suddenly they didn't have enough anchors. Lester Holt, who was doing something like 4 or 5 hours a day on MSNBC, was suddenly called to New York to do more action coverage from NBC News about the Iraq War, and now MSNBC had no anchors. They had nobody who was familiar to their audience. They had nobody. Nachman was sick. They certainly weren't going to have Phil Donahue anchor Iraq War coverage, and now Lester Holt was being taken away from them, and Brian Williams was already in Iraq, personally looking for Saddam Hussein or whatever he was doing in Iraq. So the plan was cancel Donahue's show, hire somebody good like Sam Donaldson and have him do a show called Countdown with Sam Donaldson. I've already told you how they turned that into Countdown with Keith Olbermann. But the gist of it was, as I said earlier, if there had been no threat of Iraq war, or if everybody had said, you know, Phil Donahue is right, this is asinine, this is power greedy, this is Bush trying to use 9/11 in the most insincere and brutal way possible as an excuse for an unrelated war. If everybody had said that, if Bush had resigned from the presidency and Cheney with him, if they had made Michael Moore president of the United States, they still would have fired Phil Donahue because he lost money. Phil Donahue, Television Hall of Famer, not fired over Iraq. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Most of our Countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, our musical directors of Countdown, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, which was written by Mitch Warren Davis, is courtesy of ESPN Inc., and it's our sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today is my friend Stevie Van Zandt, and everything else was, as always, my fault. That's Countdown for today, day 186 of America held hostage again. Just 1,285 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck, lame-brained term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA and Jeffrey Epstein and Trumpstein. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.